I'm working on a free roam superhero game that I first envisioned 2 decades ago, called Super Guy and Mega Boy. Game development is my hobby, so even when pouring most of my spare time into it, progress has been slow since I started this project in 2020. But earlier this year, I had a few months of rapid-fire progress that made it feel like the finish line was in sight. I even made my first devlog, announcing that I would dedicate the rest of the year to finishing the game once and for all. My plan was to program some unlockable abilities for the main characters, then finish building the open world itself, and finally start cranking out missions, boss battles, and cutscenes until the game's done. That was a little over 2 months ago, and although I have covered a lot of ground since then, I've accomplished a lot less than I thought I would. I wish I could say that it's because I haven't had as much time, or that I ran into some new bugs that took a long time to iron out. But honestly, I just kind of lost focus for a while. Now, to clarify, I'm not talking about burnout. I've had plenty of burnout over the years when I pushed myself too hard for too long. But this is an unrelated issue. The best way I can describe it is with this Sonic analogy. When Sonic has all the Chaos Emeralds and collects 50 rings, he turns into Super Sonic. As long as he keeps collecting rings, he can maintain super form indefinitely. But if his rings deplete to 0, he loses super form and has to start from scratch. That's my game dev lifestyle in a nutshell. Once I've set my mind on making the game, I go into this crazy focus mode, where I can just keep knocking out goal after goal. And if I make a habit of working on the game at least a few times a week, I can maintain that focus for long periods of time. But if I get out of game dev for more than a week or two, my focus drops to 0, and I have to start building it up from scratch all over again. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happened after I uploaded my devlog 2 months ago. I took a few days off my game, then there were several days when I just had no spare time to work on it. Then I got sick and didn't want to do anything for a week. By the time I got back to my game, all my focus was gone, and my goals suddenly seemed insurmountable. But after languishing in the dead zone for another week or so, I remembered a technique that's helped me regain focus in the past: breaking down goals. For example, one of my goals was build the rest of the overworld. That's a pretty big goal. And although I've had the idea for this game floating around in my head for 20 years, I can't just start plopping buildings all over the place and hope for the best. I needed a plan, so I broke this goal into several small pieces. Make a simple map of the overall game world, decide what kind of buildings and landmarks need to be in each area, and make a detailed map of each area that can be explored. Now, as I started mapping things out, I realized I didn't want to build the entire world and then discover I'd forgotten to add a building or landmark critical to the story. The story which, again, I'd had in my head for ages, but had never fully conceptualized beginning to end. So a new task jumped to the top of the list: plan the entire story. That took a few days, but now that I had a clear vision of the game's story, I know exactly what kind of locations needed to exist throughout the world. This made the next few mini-goals a piece of cake. Now I was ready to start building the world in-game. The world of Super Guy and Mega Boy consists of the small town of Nicklemore, the metropolitan city of Lanksburg, and a few faraway places that I can't talk about without spoiling the second half of the story. I'll be honest, when I started this project, I fully intended to make this massive interconnected world where you could freely fly from the top of a skyscraper in Lanksburg to the grocery store in Nicklemore. And although that is technically possible, there will be some loading transitions between areas. Nicklemore alone takes several minutes to load in GameMaker's editor, so there's no way I could pack the rest of the world in there without blowing up my PC. So all that said, the world will be split into 6 chunks of roughly equal size. Nicklemore fills 1 chunk, and Lanksburg will fill 3, with a bustling downtown at its center, and more laid-back areas on both sides. Now, with Nicklemore already complete, it would have made perfect sense to start building the outskirts of Lanksburg next. But I jumped straight into downtown. That's where all the skyscrapers are, and no superhero game feels right without skyscrapers. Thanks to the mini-goals I'd completed earlier, I already had a plan for how everything in downtown Lanksburg would be placed. But that wouldn't do much good if the city was ugly. So my next mini-goal was to make building textures for the skyscrapers. I used a lot of buildings in Chicago and New York City as references. I even shamelessly copied a few designs from the Spider-Man PS1 game. With textures out of the way, my next task was to finally build the city itself. This part took a while, because although I had an exact outline of where everything needed to be placed, there were still a lot of objects to be placed. Buildings, lampposts, traffic lights, vehicles, streets, sidewalks, and most tedious of all, these lighted windows that are scattered across every single building. Ugh. Finally, the downtown area was complete. But I was quickly disappointed to find that the camera view made it really hard to see the city that I'd worked so hard to build. I mean, you could fly for several seconds in any direction and see nothing but a brick wall. Luckily, I was able to fix this issue by making the camera zoom out when you enter the big city, so you can see it in all its glory. While I was working in the room editor, I stumbled across a feature in GameMaker I'd forgotten about: filters. I'd toyed around with them ages ago, but never found a practical use for them. But for kicks, I flipped through a few filters and landed on this one that adds a kind of glossy sheen wherever it's applied. It's subtle, but it gives the windows on the skyscrapers a little extra visual oomph. While flying around the city, I noticed a pretty glaring problem. The horizon just kind of cuts off. Like the Earth just drops off into nothing. In case you missed my first devlog or just weren't aware, GameMaker is not 3D friendly. The room editor treats everything as if it were flat 2D, with objects at varying depths to create the illusion of 3D. And GameMaker is only capable of drawing up to a depth of 16,000, which is, you guessed it, exactly where the horizon cuts off. I'd managed to obscure this in Nicolmore thanks to an abundance of trees I placed in the background. But the wider highways in Lanksburg made the horizon a lot harder to cover up. So I made a simple gradient of the sky color fading to transparency, plopped it on the horizon line, and voila! Now the horizon gently fades away. So, downtown Lanksburg was pretty much done. From here, I was ready to move on to the surrounding areas. But before that, I wanted to make some overdue quality of life fixes to the gameplay. For starters, a mini-map. This had been suggested by a few people, and I dreaded making it. But shockingly, it was pretty easy to make. Aside from a few minor glitches that didn't take long to fix, it does exactly what it's supposed to do, right out of the gate. So that's cool. This should help players find their way around much easier than before, because this green arrow hovering around Super Guy just wasn't cutting it on its own. The way the view zoomed in and out felt a little jumpy to me, so I rewrote the script and now it's much smoother. And even though it shouldn't technically be possible to move directly between the two areas just yet, the player can now move back and forth from Nicolmore to downtown Lanksburg. That will change when I've finished the Lanksburg outskirts, but this works for now. I decided this was a good stopping point to upload a new demo and start making the devlog you're watching now. But as I ran through story mode to test out my changes, I discovered one of the early cutscenes had a glitch that froze the cutscene and made it impossible to continue. Worse, when I compared it to the demo I posted 2 months ago, it had the exact same bug. Not sure how I missed that one before, but it's fixed now. As I continued to test everything, I found there was some noticeable new lag in Nicolmore. Part of that was due to my mini-map script causing a serious hit to the game's performance, so with a lot of tweaking I made it more efficient. But even when I turned off the mini-map for testing purposes, there was still some serious lag. I couldn't figure out why, as none of the changes I'd made recently should have affected Nicolmore. I even compared my most recent GitHub commit to the one from the demo 2 months ago, trying to find something obvious in the code that didn't belong, and there was nothing unusual. So not sure what that's about. I was able to kill the lag by cutting back on the number of NPCs that spawn, but that's really just a band-aid solution until I figure out the real cause. I still haven't given Geyser any attack capability yet, but I did tweak its speed and walk animation so it feels more like a massive robot stomping around. And I added a slight screen shake each time it takes a step. Which reminds me, I also added gamepad rumble to Geyser's footsteps and when the player takes damage, but it's kind of hard to show that on video. So that's pretty much what I've accomplished since the last devlog. Like I said, it wasn't as much as I'd hoped, but at least I'm making progress again. Remember what I said about breaking down my goals? Well, this is the list of mini goals I completed to get to this point. So even though it kind of feels like I've only added a city and a mini-map and tweaked a few things, I can look at this list and realize all the work that went into doing those things. Next on my to-do list, I plan to build the Lanksburg outskirts, make new music for Lanksburg because it's currently recycling the Nicolmore theme, update some graphics like these ugly flames and Super Guy's weird cape that just flows unnaturally. Fix Geyser's collision mask so it can't just phase through buildings like this. And I still need to add in the abilities the players will unlock later in the story. Of course, I'll be breaking all these goals into mini goals again, so I don't lose focus like last time. To clarify, I do have other hobbies, like 3D modeling, 3D printing, and playing games. So I'm not going to pour all my free time into this hobby. But if I can maintain focus, hopefully I will have accomplished all of these goals within the next month or two. So thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe! Unless you hated this video, in which case, why are you still here? Go watch something else.